Hello, welcome to another session for the Houdini Training. My name is Gianvito Serra, and today we're going to learn a bit more about use materials and how to set them up for a pipeline to go into Unreal. We're going to be setting up our column to actually work with two materials instead of one. So we're going to separate the object into multiple materials, and then we're going to build a pipeline to actually push those materials into Unreal. Okay, now again, just to clarify, this is not a rendering tutorial. This is mostly geared towards like building pipelines to pushing materials into an engine, but it will cover a little bit of about materials in general. Okay, so to begin, we're going to start with our original file that we had from the last session. Okay, if you remember, we set up our column asset to actually have an actual very quick and simple marble material on it. And what we're going to be working on now is actually getting this to actually push into Unreal. Okay. What I'd like to show you first, before we actually do that, is to actually get a little bit into how to separate this mesh into multiple materials. Okay, and in order to do so, we're going to go ahead and actually add gold plating to the top and the bottom part of a column. Okay, so maybe it's not a bit what you will actually have in a Roman temple, but it's just a little bit to actually show some of the things that we can do with multiple materials. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and allow editing of content to edit our asset. Okay, and if we remember from the last session, we created a marble material inside of our shopnet. There is a leftover clay material that we have from before. We're gonna go ahead and delete that since we're not using it. Okay, and we assign that to the column by simply dragging and dropping it here. Okay, all that does is that if we click on our geometry here, we have a path to our actual material, okay, which is cool. Now, because we actually drag and drop it, generally Houdini does absolute path, but it will automatically convert it to us to a relative path when we make this a digital asset, which is nice. Likewise, we can click on this and we can browse to the marble and just set to use the relative path, and that will also work as well. Okay. So all that does is it picks the whole object and assigns a material. Okay. Now, to assign materials to only faces of an object, we gotta take a slightly different approach. Obviously, we can obviously separate the column and the top and bottom caps into multiple objects, but I like to show you how to actually assign faces to materials to only certain faces. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is that I'm just going to, for the purposes of this, go to my material presets. So if I go into my shopnet and I click on my tool palette, I will have presets on the top of materials that I can use, which is from before. I'm going to go to materials and I'm going to pick my gold paint asset. Okay. So here is a gold material that we can use. Okay. If we drag it over here, you can even see what it starts looking like here, and then obviously compared to a marble. Okay, cool. Now, to assign the gold paint to only the bottom faces and the top faces and not the marble, we want to get into surface operator space. Okay, because at that point, when you're actually dealing with just the certain faces, you're dealing with a surface operation. Okay. So let's go inside of our column G object, and you guys remember we have a digital asset here which has the job of making this model that we see here, and the parameters of this asset are the parameters that control what ultimately this asset looks like. Okay. Oh, cool. So what we want to do is that we want to go ahead and add some more functionality to this, okay, to actually attach it to materials. So I'm gonna right click on this and say allow editing of content. Okay, and I'm gonna dive inside and take a look at over here. Okay. So if you guys remember from the tutorial where we modeled this, we have in here the left side, which generates our column and the UVs for it, and the right side, which generates the cap models. Okay, and even if you go back to the top, you know, we separated out the top cap and the bottom cap. Okay, very cool. Now, one way that we can do this very easily is to simply add a material shop to my anywhere in my network. So I can go here and say material, okay, and that will create a material shop. The material shop, we are given the following parameters. One of the parameters that we have is a path to a material in Houdini, okay? So we can click on this and we can actually go find our marble material here, okay? Can do the same thing and do a relative path, okay? And that will assign the materials to just the faces that are coming in here, okay? Well, that's great, but obviously it doesn't look that different right now. If we come on the left side, and we create another material node here, we can now click on the browse button again and instead attach this one to the gold paint material, okay? And there we go. Now when we move these together, now we have a column with two materials, okay? Cool. One important thing to notice right now, okay, is that even though I have a path to material here, Houdini is overriding this with the material path that is underneath in the subnetwork, okay? So it is important to understand that subnets material assignments, which is my assignment to faces, will take precedence over material assignments to the object, okay? By default. If we go back to the shopnet and try to drag the gold paint material or the marble material, you'll notice that really does nothing. It is doing what it normally does, which is changing the material here, but it's making no difference now because we're assigning these to the faces, okay? Let me show you a little bit more of what's going on here. If we dive inside now, we middle mouse, you will notice that now we have a new primitive attribute called shop material path, okay? This is an attribute that is created by the material subs, and they are used to tell Houdini, and for both renderers, the OpenGL and the Mantra renderer, what material is each face using as an attribute, okay? So when this renders, Houdini will know to use which material to actually use for each face, okay? Very cool. So, nice. So at this point, we're thinking, okay, well, at this point, we can probably go ahead and go back out. Just right click on this and just save, and we're done, right? However, I don't think I want my column generator to actually have pointers to external materials in my asset, in my column asset, okay? That is not a good form. One of the beautiful things about Houdini is that it really allows you to build systems that are very modular, okay? What I prefer to do in this case is to make sure that the column generator's job is to simply generate geometry, and in this particular case to help with the materials or any other help that I may need in the future, just identify the different components of the object that is generating, okay? And we can identify them using attributes, or we can identify them using groups instead, okay? So if we dive inside, let's go ahead and get rid of the material operators, okay? And you will notice that immediately Houdini goes back to the material that is assigned to the object, which in this case is the marble material, okay? So instead of using a material sub, what I'm going to use is a group sub, okay? And I'm going to put a group sub on the left here, okay? So let's take a look at this. So this is going to be our column body. We're just going to call it column body, okay? I'm going to do the same thing on the right. I'm going to put another group operator here. Actually, I'm going to not even put it here. I'll shake it off from here, and I am going to put it after the top cap, and I'm going to call this one column top cap. I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom cap and call it column bottom cap. Very cool. Alright, so what that is doing is that instead of actually assigning materials, if I middle mouse on the nodes, you will notice that now I have primitive groups. I have a primitive group that isolates the column bottom cap faces, and I have another primitive group that is the column top cap faces, okay? And then over here, I have another primitive group, which is the column body. Very cool. So if we go back to the top, we can actually use our select tool, and they have there is a really useful group visualizer in Houdini, which we can activate with this. So we can see our groups here, and we can see there is a top cap, there is a bottom cap, and there is a body, okay? So we can see all the different material assignments. Cool. Let's go back to our manipulation or view tool. Okay. And now that I have those groups, if I middle mouse here, they're still here after the coming out of the digital asset. Okay. We're going to go ahead and now save my digital asset with the groups. So we're going to say save, node type. And I'm going to say match current definition. Okay, so now my column generator generates also groups to separate out the body, the bottom cap, and the top cap. Okay, and again, just to make it very clear, if we put a blast node, we can actually see the pieces isolated right here. There is our body, there is our bottom cap, and there is our top cap. Okay, cool. So the nice thing about that is that now that I have my groups, I can actually put a material. So you can simply put a material sub right here. Okay? And you will notice that one of the parameters the material sub has is the group field. Okay? In the group field, we can specify a group of faces to which to assign the material. Okay? So if we go to the drop down here, you will notice that our groups are here already. So we want to say that we want the column body to be assigned to the marble material, goes for relative path. Very cool. And then I'm gonna go ahead and see what is its number of materials. I'm gonna click on the plus. And I'm gonna pick the bottom cap and the top cap, okay, and I'm gonna assign them to the gold pen material. Very good. So now the column generator tutorial node is completely independent of the material assignment. The material assignment is a function of the column asset itself, which is good. It's a good way to modularize the way how your system works. Okay, materials themselves can be also digital assets. Okay, so at that point you have all these little modules that are orchestrated together by the column asset itself. Okay, awesome, very cool. So at any point you can also click on this little arrow right here to go to where the materials are as well, and you can see them here. Okay, Cool. So now we have a column with two materials. I have my marble and my gold. Okay. One thing that you will notice is that the gold doesn't really look too much like gold, obviously, because we're looking at things here using the default, just the default view in Houdini, not too much in here. Okay. What I like to show too is a little bit of how to visualize these things a little bit better in the OpenGL viewport. Again, we're not really talking about rendering here, mantra rendering, but since we're talking about, in-engine workflows, I like to show just a little bit about the OpenGL renderer here, okay? What I like to do is to bring a environment light into my scene, okay? So if we go to the top shelf, okay, and we look on the right here, you're gonna have one light that is called the environment light, okay? This is the environment. That environment light allows you to bring a high dynamic range image, which you can use to actually illuminate your object. And because we're actually dealing with reflective materials here and physical based rendering, having image-based lighting really helps, be able to visualize this correctly, okay? So let's click on the environment light, okay? And for the environment map, I'm going to go ahead and actually browse to one of my images that I have. In my particular case, I just have some maps which I downloaded from SIBL, and the licensing is mentioned on my in these video comments. But let's use this particular one. Okay, and we'll use the 3K HDR. There we go. But with the default settings, you're going to see probably a little bit of graininess. Most video cards nowadays should be able to handle a little bit more light samples. If you want to fix that, just go to the display options down here for your viewport. And if you go to the effects tab, so you may be here, for example, go down to effects. And this is where you have your light samples. Just crank this up to something like 32. And that should smooth out the noise a little bit. Okay? Very cool. Now, if we look over here, now we have our column asset and an environment light. Let's move this over here, that's an old one. Okay, so in our environment light, we can adjust the exposure, we can adjust the the light intensity or the light color. We can also use it to just make an ambient occlusion past in here, if we really wanted to. But for this particular case, I just want to actually use it for the direct lighting, okay? Keep in mind that a lot of these settings really pertain to rendering, OpenGL, viewport stuff, you can control from the actual view options here, okay? Very cool. And I also probably increase a little bit of my anti-aliasing, there we go. And like I said, most video cards should be able to handle this quite well. Okay, so another thing I want to do with my gold, I just want it to look a little bit more shiny. I don't want it to look so much like paint, but I want it to look a little bit more like just straight up gold. So I'm just gonna come in here and actually just increase my reflection and actually reduce my roughness. Okay, so it's a little bit more like, just like regular gold. Okay, here's my golden column. Now, the shader that I'm using for the gold paint is what is called the principal shader. It is a new shader that was introduced in Houdini 15, and it's very, very, very useful it's really kind of like a fresh implementation for them in regards to the physical base rendering. It really makes physical base rendering a lot simpler from the original main shader that I used, which was the mantra surface. The mantra surface supports a lot of the same, but it is actually, it was built with physical base rendering, but in a much older context than gold paint. Than principal shader. Principal shader embraces a lot of the physical base rendering principles a lot better, so I recommend actually using it quite a bit. 99% of the time, if you're trying to make a material, you can probably get away with just any of the presets that I have here, or just actually creating your own principal shader. In fact, what I like to do here, just to demonstrate that, is that for our marble, I like to switch my marble to use a principal shader instead. Okay, I'm gonna make one from scratch. So by scratch, I mean that I am just going to use the principal shader digital asset that I have here, and not one of in the raw state, not one of their presets. Okay, you can still make your own shader inside of Houdini by diving inside of the networks of the shared materials and actually using VOPs to make your own shader, but that's not what we're going to do in this class. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm going to just rename this one to marble old for now. Okay, and then I'm gonna drag a principal shader here. Okay, and I'm gonna call this one marble. Cool. And let's go ahead and assign this one to the actual objects. Actually, let me try this again. I'm gonna try something different. Undo. Oops. Let me do that. What I wanted to do is undo the creation of a material really quick, and the renaming of my marble. Okay. What I like to do is actually I'm going to delete my marble material, and I'm going to drag a principal shader and actually call it marble. And you will notice that immediately when I renamed it to marble, the actual material automatically hooked up to the actual faces. Okay, and that's one of the beauties, yeah, again, working with Houdini, because everything is expressed as nodes and is completely persistent. Even the material assignments that we do to different faces is fully persistent, making it very easy for us to be able to do this kind of making it very easy for us to actually be able to make this kind of like one-off switches. Okay, so normal material, the first thing I want to do is that I want to use the color texture that I created, and for my map, you will notice that if I click on the drop-down menu here, I still have on my shortcut the actual full path to the cupnet. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually click on that, and here is our granite material assigned already. Okay, very cool. So now our actual marble is also use a principal shader for consistency, and we have similar controls that we have with the goal for actually working with this a little bit more of a PBR context. Okay, very cool. Cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and at this point we're going to go ahead and get these materials now exported to Unreal. Okay, now here is one catch that we want to make sure that we do. If we go back to the column export section, which is the section that takes my column and sets it up for exporting, you notice that I still have the material pointing to the marble here. Now it makes no difference here because, again, the assignment to the actual faces overrides the assignment to the actual object. But just for cleanliness purposes, I'm going to eliminate this. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and get this asset exported. Okay. Let me go ahead and actually save this as with, I'm going to call it code for my own purposes. I'm going to call it to materials. Okay. Let's go ahead and actually get this exported to a particular location. I'm going to call it column to materials. Very cool. Very cool. All right. So now I have it with this name. Let's go ahead and click on Save FBX file. All right, so much like we did before, now our asset save an FBX file like that. And let's go ahead and actually import it to Unreal to see what happens, okay? So if we go import, and we go to the location of our FBX file, so here is import options. If you remember, in import options, we have the option to import material and also import texture share, which is cool. So the FBX pipeline of Unreal will try to bring in as much of it can from the FBX as possible to try to make it a little bit easier on the user to have the asset ready to go. So let's import all. Okay. And here is our asset, okay? And you will notice that in addition to our asset, we got also the two materials. Okay, so let's get our asset in the scene. Frame it. Let's take a closer look, okay? So you notice that there is two things missing, okay, immediately. We're missing the texture, and our gold doesn't look like gold, it looks like black plastic. So I'm going to explain a little bit of why. So we go back to Houdini, then dive inside of our asset and look at our gold material. I'm going to explain one thing at a time. I'm going to explain first why our gold looks like black, okay? If you look at our gold, you will notice that we have all of our settings for PBR rendering here, in addition to some extra ones. But if we go to OpenGL, you will see that we have a whole section that defines how this asset renders in the OpenGL renderer, okay? So pretty much all material presets in Houdini, I would say probably the majority of them work this way, okay? There is almost like an Uber, OpenGL shader that runs behind the hood, which is tied to the mantra rendering, okay? So like when you set parameters to do the mantra rendering, it is automatically set up in such a way where it automatically uses expressions to drive the parameters of the OpenGL renderer, OpenGL shader that is tied to this particular object, okay? Now, you can write your own shaders inside of Houdini, your own GLSL shaders, and that's totally cool. But most shaders in Houdini, and especially the principal shader, is set up in such a way where it drives Houdini's OpenGL PBR shader to render, this to feel like it is in a physical-based environment, okay? But you will notice that, diffuse has expressions, for example, which are driven by the amount of metallic, right? So the more metallic you have, the less diffuse you have. In the GGX model, the specular color is driven by the actual, metallic value, the base color value, etc., etc. The inner IOR, the outer IOR are driven by the actual, metalness, roughness, etc., etc. And we have an OpenGL roughness here. And likewise, the maps that we actually hook up on the OpenGL shader, on the mantra shader, drive also the ones on the OpenGL fader by default. Now we can completely break every single one of these expressions and start vanilla and just use this tab to drive the look of our real-time shader, okay? And that's totally cool too. All of these red ones are basically just Python expressions, which drive these parameters. So you can completely forgo anything that is related to the mantra rendering and just make the shader just simply work on OpenGL if you want, and that's fine. For this case, we don't have to. I just wanted to explain a little bit how that works so that you were aware. But there is an interesting point here to see. If we look at the OpenGL, if we look at this, the OpenGL diffuse here is set to black, and the OpenGL specular is set to the goldish color, okay? But that's because of the way how metallic in PBR affects the actual diffuse channel. If you remember from the physical base rendering, the amount of metallic affects the amount of diffuse that you have, to where like you will actually not render diffuse. Is all driven by your reflectance, and in this particular case the color of there is an actual color to the reflectance to actually give the gold. Okay, now this is actually tied obviously to the base color. Now if we actually reduce the metallic down to 0 with OpenGL, now you will notice that my diffuse is yellow and my specular is just set to white to actually do the more, plasticky, fungus specular that we normally will see. Okay? It's just the way how Houdini actually makes it so that you can, the same shader that you use in the Mantra renderer works exactly the same way in the OpenGL renderer. Okay? Very cool. And again, you can make your own shaders and actually have one shader that renders the OpenGL and one shader renders in Mantra, but that's alright. For this, we're just going to be using this, okay? Alright, so what happens when we push this to Unreal is that Unreal works a little bit different, okay? The way Unreal actually does physical-based rendering is that the actual diffuse color drives the actual color of the reflectance, right? So what you're actually seeing here is that if we go to the gold paint material simply took the black diffuse color that we took from Houdini, which makes sense. So in Houdini, if your material is black, in Unreal it will show up also as black. Okay. Likewise, if we go to the marble, you notice that the marble is picking up the actual metallic, the actual base color that we picked for the actual marble. Okay, that light gray that we had there. Okay, and sure enough, if we go back to Houdini, and we click on the marble, and we look at the OpenGL, you will notice that those are the values that we see on the OGL diffuse. Okay, so Unreal will try to bring as much of the material data as possible for us. Okay, so how do we resolve this problem? Now, really quick before we push forward. Well, very simply, what we need to be able to do is that, first of all, we need to be able to set this up as a material that is actually PBR based, okay? So in order to do so, we need to first add a constant. And we want to go ahead and actually set the metallic value for the gold. So we want the gold to be 100% metallic, like we did in Houdini. We can actually just type the value here. And also set up another constant for the roughness. So we have a roughness of 0. Okay. And when we save this, you will notice that now we get basically a material that is completely black. Okay, which is not good. However, you will notice if I feed this one to the specular, we actually still don't get anything. Okay, and that's again because Unreal, when you have a metallic object, it uses the actual diffuse color to actually drive the color of the actual specular, okay, in a metallic object. So let's disconnect this for a second. As I wouldn't have to, we can simply connect to the base color, and now you see a fully reflective material being used, okay? There you go. As you can imagine, to make it gold, all that we have to do is that the base color had to kind of match that goldish color that we had in Houdini. Okay. Saturation, a little darker. Okay. And simply feed that color into the base color. And now check it out. Make it a little bit warmer. And then when we save, and you'll see that that's actually being picked up now in Unreal as well. Okay. To see a little bit better, let's go ahead and actually add a skylight. Okay. And let's set up our skylight to the same cube map. Oh, let's go ahead and import it. Let's import our cube map that we use in Houdini. Oh, over here. Let's see, we want this one. Unreal will take care of, the Unreal pipeline will take care of making sure that it's the proper size and everything. And then we'll go ahead and set this to the tropical ruins material, okay? So now we have the same material, the same cube map that we had in Houdini here. Very cool. Now, I don't want to have to set up this material every time that I import from Houdini. That's not a good thing, okay? So one thing that we can do to help with that is to actually create a reference copy of this material, which will have some modifications for the export, okay? And I'll show you what I mean. So what we want is basically a material where the, let me select the gold pen again, where the diffuse is actually the same value as the specular, okay? For it to work properly in Unreal. So what we can do is we can right click on this and say actions and then create reference copy. Okay, so this creates a new gold pane material where everything is being driven by this gold pane material. Okay, I'm gonna call this gold pane underscore export. Okay, then all that we have to do is to break the diffuse expression. So delete channels. Copy the specular value. You can probably even copy from here. In fact, what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to delete the specular expression too. I'm going to say delete channels. And I'm going to copy from here my gold pane into the export material. Okay? Then I'm going to copy this and simply copy that into my diffuse. Very cool. Now my diffuse is the same color as my specular, okay? Now if we go back up and we go to our export asset, all that we have to do before the divide is to add a material node and simply say that we want the bottom cap and the top cap to be assigned not to the gold pane, but to the gold pane export. There we go. So it looks kind of strange here, but when we are inside of, when we go back out and we know that the export node is always hidden because we don't care about that. All that is purely for function. All that we want to be able to see is what this looks like, you know, from the column geo. Okay. Because that's now assigned as a material right here. Now, when it exports, it should have the proper specular values, okay? So let's try that again. And then save our scene. And I'm going to go ahead and save my FPS file, okay? I'm going to go to Unreal. I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I'm going to delete my whole import, you know, to start fresh for this, okay? So we're going to select these three guys. I'm going to delete them. I'm going to force delete them because I had them used on my scene. And I start fresh, okay? So I'm going to do import. I'm going to go back to data, and we're going to go back to our FBX file where we exported it. Say open. And I'm going to import materials and import textures like I did before. And here we go. Now our material actually kept the diffuse color from Houdini, okay? One thing to note though is that by default Unreal is not going to hook up all the other values. It's not going to hook up the metallic or the roughness for us. We do need to actually set those up, okay? So let's go back to constants and then let's add our 0 for the roughness. We can copy and paste this to get 1 for the metalness. So you have something that looks pretty goldish, very much on the get-go. There you go. Cool. Very cool. Okay, so now that was very quick. Now going into the second problem, we need to look into why the texture didn't import. Okay. So the thing to remember about what we're doing with the marble texture in Houdini is that the marble texture is not a real static texture that sits on the disk. Okay. It is actually generated by a cupnet, which we have here. Okay. So Houdini has a means to actually display the results of a cupnet on a model in real time, but Unreal doesn't. Okay. So we need to be able to export that texture into a file so that it can be used by Unreal. Okay. So what we're going to do is that we're going to go to our cupnet. In addition to the out node, we're going to add a we need to add a file out node. Okay. I want to do a little bit different. Instead of actually doing it that way, what I like to do is to go to my ROPNet that saves my FBX file and instead add a cupnet. Actually, sorry, add a composite node. Okay. What a composite node allows me to do in my ROPNet is that it allows me to export the results of a composite network into a file. Much like a FBX exporter allows me to export the results of an FBX export into a file. Okay? Let me show that again really quick. So if we go back to our column asset and we're on the top, we're gonna go back into our ROPNet, which is the thing that handles all of our exports. Okay? And next to the film modes FBX, we're gonna add a composite ROP. Okay? The composite ROP we're gonna set to current frame, and it wants a path to a cup name. Okay, so we're gonna point it to the out node in the cup. Okay, I'm gonna export at whatever resolution the cup is, although we can specify a resolution here if we want to. Let's go ahead and actually specify a resolution for now. Okay. And then, it asks you for what planes you want to export. If you want to color or alpha and stuff like that. And also the output picture name. Okay. So let's go ahead and actually set this up so that it exports a texture in addition to the model. Okay. So go back to our column asset. Let's go ahead and go to type properties. Okay. And if you look at the bottom here, we have an output FBX and a button that says save FBX. Okay. Let's go ahead and actually add a new button. So I'm going to add a output picture, which is going to add the export for the output picture. Hold on, let me move this down. Let me minimize this so we can see a little bit. So I'm going to add the output picture for the actual image itself. So I'm going to call it output texture. Output texture. Cool. And I'm going to also promote the resolution. Output S. Output texture S. And I'm going to go ahead and actually promote the render button, which is going to save my texture. I'm gonna call it the same as I called the other one. So save texture. Save texture. Okay. I think I want to have the FBX stuff on the top, and then I'm going to have the texture stuff on the bottom. Okay, so let's hit apply. We'll go back to the top. There is a new UI here. And then what I'm going to do is actually reorganize things a little bit here just to make the UI look a little bit cleaner. So maybe what I'll do is I'll actually put the FBX, instead of actually having the FBX button on the right, I'm going to turn this off and then hit apply. And maybe I'll go with this, okay? So we can see output FBX, save FBX, and output texture, and then the texture settings, okay? And let's go ahead and actually for the output texture, instead of actually having that as a default, let's go to channels and set our default to $hip column texture dot target, okay? And then I'm gonna hit accept. Maybe your output resolution should probably be something smaller, maybe something like 512 by 512. Okay, and let's hit accept. Alright, and here is our new UI. Now, if we click on save texture, and we go back to here, you will notice that now we have a target file, which is our texture. And if we look at that texture, actually if we just import it to Unreal, you will notice that is the procedural marble texture that we generated, okay? Which we can simply assign to the marble to be able to use for this, okay? So for our base color, simply bring a texture. Let me see. Let me see which one then. Texture sample. Let me bring the UVs. This may already be working with the proper UVs. So let's just go ahead and actually point this to the column texture and just feed that into the base column. Okay. And if we save, now we'll see that our marble texture is now assigned to our column here. Okay. And then from here we can start setting up our settings for the marble material to have, you know, the proper PBR. Okay. Now, here we go. Now we can actually set up the export asset to even use a version of the material which uses the texture that we just exported. So that now when importing to Unreal happens, it will automatically pick it up. But for the purposes of this tutorial, we'll go ahead and probably use, we probably won't go into that right now. I mean, right now we have basically a very quick means for actually saving the FBX and saving the texture. Okay. We can also modify the texture settings at any point. So for example, we can increase the marble frequency to be 6 by 8 and simply just hit save texture and go to Unreal and just refresh your texture, which will immediately update it right here. Okay, very cool. We can obviously start playing with the marble material and starting to add metallic and specular settings to actually give a proper PBR look in here as well. So bring constant. We can bring our roughness to about Just a little bit higher. Maybe something like this. And then on metallic we want it to pretty much be 0, so let me save. All of these changes should be working in here already. Okay. Now we can go a little bit lower on there, a little bit higher on the roughness. Let's see. Alright. So that should cover it. This is how we can actually build a pipeline here. Obviously remember, after doing all your changes that we did, do remember to save your node type and to match current definition. Okay, so that we have everything saved. Alright. I'm gonna go ahead and save my scene as well. And I think that's probably it for the day. We covered a little bit about how to actually build a material pipeline that can actually push materials back into Unreal. This is now set up in such a way where if you change materials assignments, everything will be persisted back into Unreal as needed. We can still, even though we have everything changed the way we did, we can still come to our column settings and adjust the column settings like we used to before, and be able to actually see our changes on the fly on our PBR, with our physical base shader, and be able to very quickly export our changes back to Unreal if we want to. Okay. If we want our column to be really short, save the FBX, and we can simply come to Unreal and do a reimport. And here it is. Okay, well, I think that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.